Good afternoon, everybody. We're coming back to you with another Halo video. This time, we're changing things up quite a bit. We're going to start doing a breakdown of the lore of some of our favorite video games. We decided that we wanted to start by making things very difficult with Halo because there is just a ton of backstory. And because of that, we're going to try to make these 4 to 5 videos that are 15 to 20 minutes long. And we're going to break them down into general topics of each section of time within the Halo universe. To clarify that a little bit, this video is going to discuss the Precursors, or in other words, the time before the Forerunners, the Forerunner Empire itself, and then the Human-Flood-Forerunner War. Those are distinct, 3 separate time phases within the Halo universe that we want to discuss in detail and sort of debate the unknowns. In the next video, we will discuss the lighting of the Halo array and the events that led up to it. The next video will discuss the events surrounding Halo 1 to 3. And then the next video, and we haven't decided yet if this will be 2 parts or one, we'll discuss the current events from Halo 4 up to the beginning of Halo Infinite. Aegis, what do you think of that? Are we taking a little bit too much on?
Oh man, we're biting off a big old chunk of beef right now. There's a lot here to say it's a little esoteric and convoluted is probably an understatement, and there's gonna be times where we basically should have like a disclaimer running across the bottom. Sorry if you get a mind meld right now.
Yeah, and guys, one thing that having read a lot of the Halo lore myself as it came out, understand that there is a lot of fluctuation in Halo lore, and it's intentional because you're kind of hearing these stories from different points of view, and basically you're intentionally hearing lies sometimes that the games and the books don't tell you for a while is a lie. So if me or Aegis has some slightly outdated information and we get something wrong, we apologize. We've tried to sort it out the best we can and get it in order accurately. Aegis, do you want to make any apologies before we screw this up?
Uh, nope, proceed at your own risk. Although, what I will say is it's interesting that you were really like loving the lore when you're younger, and you still sound like you do. I've always liked the lore too, but I've always been a massive fan of the games. I haven't actually gotten into reading more of the books other than Harvest, The Fall of Reach, and Shadows of Reach. But like everybody else as you get older, things stay like it's like, oh, I'll get to that eventually, but you never get to it. I really do want to read all the Halo books just because they're like we're gonna get into, they're very interesting, good reads, and having played the games a bunch when I was a kid, I'm also attached to them for nostalgic reasons.
And they're surprisingly confusing reads for books that are tied into video games. The lore gets extremely complicated. There's a lot of characters and a lot of, like I said, lies and misconceptions that are intentionally strewn in to basically show all the different perspectives of what's happening. And well, let's just get into it. They'll see very quickly how confusing this gets.
Yep.
The first topic we're going to hit on is the precursors. Now, this part of the storyline, Aegis, I know that you're not as experienced with it, but it starts millennia before even the Forerunner Flood War.
Right.
The precursors were this very, very godlike species that came into our galaxy, the Milky Way, and they did something known as seeding. Now, that's based on a real world theory that life did not come to Earth through natural development, it was put here by something else. Well, the Halo universe embraces that. The precursors were the species that brought life to the Milky Way galaxy and began to develop it. What do you think? Do you like that Halo got into the debate about where life came from, or do you think that might be a little too big for the games that we play?
I mean, it kind of lends credit to like both arguments because there's the creation of by some higher power, but also the universe lasts has lasted longer than 6,000 years in the case of Halo. It's multiple millions and millions of years and possibly billions. But there's this outside like Lovecraftian like force at play that has created some of the big players in the Halo universe, mainly humanity and the related human-like species like the elites and stuff, or the Sangheli, but also the Forerunners.
Yeah, and I did think it was interesting because when I was younger, I found the religious themes in Halo to be very fascinating, even though the games didn't get that far into it. They kind of just showed it. I did find it fascinating that the books decided to really go with, okay, we're going to break down basically what our versions of gods
You know what's funny though?
are.
Like the high charity and like their belief in like lighting the rings and going on the great journey. That's kind of like a funny little nod to a cult, like believing their cause is going to be the most holy, and then actually everybody ends up dying.
Yeah, everyone gets to suffer for everyone else's faith. It's a parallel that I think is a little too dark for a discussion about Halo, but you're not wrong. So, all right, the precursors come to our world, and with it they bring, or our galaxy, not just our world. With it they bring a ton of very advanced technology, and this is where the mind meld starts. Let's give an example here real quickly. The precursors had the ability, whether naturally or through development of their own genetics, to shapeshift and to use telekinesis. It is never clearly stated, for probably intentional reasons, whether this was natural. I would say, Aegis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this would have to be something that would be bred into a species using genetic modification, if it was even possible. I don't think even the Halo lore can say that species would start naturally with something like telekinesis. Do you think that's possible, or do you think this is supposed to be hinted as they're advanced beyond belief?
It's probably advanced beyond belief. Like even like in Halo 4, you know, we see the Erdidact using what is like appears to be telekinesis to drag, say in one instance, Chief to him, almost like choking him. But that could be he's just so strong and above humanity that he has that ability, kind of like we see with the precursors.
Yeah, and that will tie in a very interesting way in a little bit that you just mentioned how it appears that the Didact is able to use the same type of technology as the precursors. But let's wait for that a little bit. We don't need to spoil everything in the first 5 minutes of the video for those who don't know what's going to happen.
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers, sweetie. So yeah, they also have some very advanced physical um, advancements in technology. An example of that would be what they called the star roads, which were basically gigantic roads in space that were made up of fibrous material that is, again, beyond human understanding, that literally linked worlds together. On top of that, they had extremely advanced physics that's known as neural physics, and that effectively let them create something known as the domain, which is a way to upload actual consciousness to some form of computer network. And it's highly suggested this computer network is actually the universe, not so much a physical computer. But again, it's intentionally made so outlandishly advanced that there's no possible way you could really understand it. And I think this isn't where I get mad at Halo, Aegis, but it is where I get a little frustrated with they take it so far with this technology stuff that it's almost hard to follow what's even happening at some points. You've read a summary of these stories. Would you agree to that?
Oh, there was times where I had to actually backtrack and just think, okay, I got to reread that again so I can actually make heads or tails of it. And even then, I'm almost running it by you to see how you think of it too, because it's like you said, it's almost like a mind melder, warping my mind.
I'm glad you don't disagree with me because I will not lie to you. At some points during the Forerunner Saga, I felt a little dumb, and I will tell the world I have a degree in something that should make me understand chemistry, physics, math, and this stuff sort of warped my brain a little.
So he
So
thinks.
yeah, exactly.
But
So I'm saying is this is the moment where I'm like, the video game book is actually confusing me when it's talking science. That seems a little, it seems a little far, but it is what it is.
one thing that made sense to me though was those star roads. They're kind of almost like oh geez, what are those the big gates in Mass Effect, which uh the mass relays they're used to transport between different worlds, almost like hyperspace lanes from Star Wars. There's a lot of like commonality here between these three different game franchises and
Right,
media
and that's fair.
franchises.
And I've never played Mass Effect, so I wouldn't know that parallel. But yeah, I guess it's fair that that is something that's fairly common in more sci-fi based stories.
Yep.
But I think that what we're doing right now is I'm a little bit rambling to show just how advanced the precursors were. Because the next thing I'm going to say is the precursors made us. And Aegis, we've already briefly talked about that. But effectively, what the stories say is the precursors made the Forerunners, they made humanity, they made the Santium, which are the prophets, they made the elites, and they made basically every other species that exists in our galaxy. And the hinting within the story, and this gets very diluted later on because you're being told this story from, let's go with a false prophet or an untrustworthy narrator, is that these precursors believed that they protected life. It was their job to create life and then protect it, nourish it, and grow it. But the precursors believed in this weird meld of almost a god, but not a god. They believed that the universe was a living thing and that anything that we experience from good to bad nourished the universe and effectively made the universe a more full, better place. So they believed that by developing these species, they were giving the universe more experience because through everything we experienced, every happy moment that a human had in their existence, every traumatic moment that a human had in their existence, the universe would be developed. Aegis, do you follow that? Am I describing that clearly enough to make it not sound really weird?
I mean, on a basic level, it sounds kind of like just the universe's yin and yang, right? Good, bad, good experiences, bad experiences. They balance out and they enrich the world or the universe or life.
Right. Okay, so I'm getting my point across. So what the precursors believed was that eventually they would need to move on from our galaxy, or so the narrative says to this point in the Halo books. I don't personally believe this is accurate. I've heard, I'm getting ahead of myself. I've heard lore theories that I actually think are the way the stories are going. But at this point, it appears that the precursors intended to leave our galaxy and leave another species basically as the top species and to inherit what they called the mantle of responsibility. Now, this mantle effectively was exactly what they put upon themselves, that they had to protect the other species in the universe, in the galaxy, and they had to help grow them. And originally, this mantle was supposed to be passed on to the Forerunners. However, for whatever reason, the precursors watched the Forerunners and thought, no, they're not the right ones to be taking over. We should give this to humanity. Now, Aegis, what do you think a species would need to be like to take over something like the mantle of responsibility for the entirety of the universe? And do you think humanity would actually be deserving of something like that?
Well, I'm just trying to think of what would the Forerunner species do as a whole to make them not be worthy. And I'm thinking of obvious things like malevolence or just like selfishness or greed for their own sake. And I feel like humanity could very well and have very well displayed those same, feelings and displayed those same actions. So you'd think that you'd have to be like more of like in the best interest of everybody instead of just being selfish. Uh, More neutral and not, like I said, not selfish. What do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking it also fell upon ability to pre-plan, ability to develop things in a more complicated way than just, okay, we're dropping a species here, hopefully they survive. And the issue is, though, is every way I look at this, if I was to pick a species to perfectly develop a universe, I wouldn't want that species to be pure good. I tend to think that's not how development really works. There needs to be struggle. But if I was picking a perfect species, humanity is quite flawed. We almost go beyond the struggle to develop. We do some pretty bad things just to our one world, right? And that's why I question this part of the storyline as told thus far. I don't understand what would make the precursors pick humanity or not pick the Forerunners, which is why I wonder if there's something else that will be dropped in the future about what happened here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, think like if they were both seeded at the same time, then it sounds like they both evolved approximately at the same rate, although maybe the Forerunners did more. That's why they were being, observed more closely to see if they could take over this mantle of responsibility first. But I'm not really sure, same as you, what would have caused them to shift their focus to humanity. Hmm.
Well, either way, we both know the end result was the same, whether it was a benevolent act by the precursors to try to pass this mantle to humanity, or whether it was some form of experiment. The Forerunners didn't like it, and they turned on the precursors. And this is the first major war event in the Halo universe on the galactic level. The Forerunners attacked the precursors aggressively and quickly, and even though they were not anywhere near as technologically advanced as the precursors, they managed to drive them to near extinction. Now, Aegis, this is my second question about this time period in the Halo lore. I fully believe the Forerunners attacked the Precursors, and everything you see in the books, it's believable that that's something that the Forerunners would pull. However, do you think that even with shock tactics, a species as not as well, the Forerunners were advanced, but not as anywhere near advanced as the Precursors, would be able to do anything, hit and run tactics, guerrilla tactics on a galaxy-wide level to take out a species that was capable of shape-shifting, reality warping, creating life, destroying life, effectively teleporting. Do you think that that makes a whole lot of sense that the precursor or the Forerunners managed to turn on the precursors so suddenly and win?
I mean, they must have had like a lot of planning, but what I wonder is maybe because the precursors are so strong, there was significantly less of a bigger population of them. Like, so maybe for every one precursor, there's maybe 1,000 forerunners to, compensate for just their level of power. But
Oh, so you're thinking it's pure numbers. It would have been a number game.
yeah, maybe like the universe is balanced. Like maybe you have like in the ocean, maybe you have like X amount of whales, but you have like billions and billions and billions of anchovies or something.
No, that's fair, and that's fully possible. So I'm going to leave just this little touch of conspiracy here, but there is certainly belief in the community or the Halo community at large that it's possible the precursors intentionally let the Forerunners win this war. But that's a theory that's not for today. Whatever happened, happened. The precursors were driven to near extinction. So, the end of this very brief story and the very little information we know about the precursors is that they were forced to retreat basically to the edge of the known galaxy and then try to put themselves into a state of stasis or cryosleep. And in the books, this is described as reducing themselves to their most basic forms and basically entering a hibernation that would last millennia. And for a while, that is the last we hear of the precursors. The Forerunners forcibly take over the mantle of responsibility and they begin to, what would we call it, Aegis? It happens in the real world. Rewrite history. They begin to rewrite history that the precursors voluntarily left the galaxy and left them the mantle of responsibility.
I mean, he who wins the war gets to write the story, right? Or gets to write history.
Yeah, now what do you think of that, Aegis? If we had actual gods in our world, or things that were so far scientifically advanced to us that they were effectively our gods, do you think it's right for the beast to turn on its creator or to try to take over from its creator? Do you think that's natural? Do you think that's development? Or do you think that that is a betrayal beyond all betrayals?
Oh, this is Winter. This is some philosophical shit right here. Let me tell you. Uh, I I mean, you think of like a queen bee and like the worker bees. You don't hear of worker bees overthrowing the queen bee because the queen bee, helps keep them alive and helps the colony thrive. So I can't think of a reason as to why the Forerunners would think that, you know, that's okay, it's cool. It's not cool to overthrow the precursors. Forerunners, come on. But I mean, you know, they they if they were more level-headed, maybe it's easy for me to say this, but maybe they could just think, it's not in the best interest of the galaxy and life for us to become holding the mantle of responsibility. Maybe the humanity is better, and the precursors can see that through their benevolence and their, almightiness. It's not even
So
really an
I'm not,
answer. That's not even an answer at
no,
all, but I'm not giving one.
and I'm not going to lie to you, Aegis. I fall on the side of the Halo nerd theorists that don't believe the precursors were benevolent. I I tend to believe they were a much more neutral species, and maybe we should do a side video of theories that have been proposed by the actual fans of the games that have not yet been confirmed. But for now, we should probably go along with the at this time confirmed canon that the precursors were benevolent, the forerunners turned on their makers, and the precursors were effectively driven to extinction, except for a few possible survivors.
Right.
But this leads into section 2. With the precursors gone, the forerunners took over the mantle of responsibility and became the most dominant species in the galaxy. Humanity was basically the second most powerful species, but they were at peace with the forerunners. They were not at war, and that is kind of how the universe settled with the disappearance of the precursors. Aegis, did you want to lead a bit of a talk here about the development of the Forerunner Empire and how their caste system works?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So, I mean, their caste system is kind of like, our system today. We have people that are in like the medical field and studying life and understanding, kind of like biology, and they are what was referred to as life workers in the Forerunner Society. And then there were the builders, and the builders were responsible for designing and constructing architecture, weapons of war, transportation like ships and stuff. And the highest rank in the builder sector, the caste, was the master builder. And last but not least, there was the warrior servants or the warrior sect, which is within the Forerunner Society, and they were largely responsible for like defense and upholding peace, such as like police officers, but also the army, military, uh, admirals, and like working in like starfleets and stuff. So for life workers, the highest rank of that caste is actually the life shaper, and the life shaper was used to uh, operate and have like the highest dominion of all life workers. And in the Halo narrative, the life shaper is the librarian, and I'm sure we'll get into discussing her role in the Forerunner Empire and such later on in our discussion. Uh, One of the most prominent master builders that we have actually in the Halo narrative is Faber, and he was the last Forerunner to actually hold that title. Um, So yeah, the Forerunners Master Builder would be the chief of the builder and all the guilds and in charge of, commissioning big projects and stuff that we'd see today in the story. And for the warrior servants, now what's funny is they were some of their lower classes in like their Forerunner society. Um, so you would think that they're lower, they might not be the most respected, but actually being in charge of their defenses, they were actually garnered with a great amount of respect. With their most respected class in the warrior servants being what some of you will recognize as the Prometheans, and we'll get into their ranking in society and the military later on in our discussion. And the leader of the warrior servants was the Didact, and ones that we're actually most familiar with are the Didact and his successor, the Isodidact, and we'll get into them too later.
Right. And it's important for anyone who has not heard these stories to understand that the Forerunners, while they were galaxy spanning, still elected to have one large upper council, which was effectively the leaders of all of these castes, who would meet on a world known as Mithrillion. And this Mithrillion world was, while not the home world of the Forerunners, it was basically a large capital city in space that should remind you of another large capital city in space that we know of in the Halo universe. But this Mithrillion is the centerpiece of the Forerunner Empire. On the flip side, humanity also was developing rapidly. We were very advanced in science. we were very advanced in our understanding of the galaxy. Humanity at the time was led by a warrior known as the Lord of Admirals, and he has some role to play in the Halo universe, but for the point of this discussion, just know the Lord of Admirals led most of the combat that was going on in the later battles in the wars that we're going to talk about. So while the Forerunner Empire flourished, humanity discovered two things. Aegis, do you remember what two things they discovered at this point?
I remember they discovered what would eventually become the Precursors and the Flood. That's one of the big ones, but I can't recall
Good,
the second one.
good spoiler. Um, yes. So they discovered something known as the Timeless One or the Primordial. They also discovered a powder that, while they were uncertain what it was on some form of a ship that the books don't describe in detail, and it was found in canisters. So humanity took this primordial and began to interrogate it. At the same time, and Aegis kind of spoiled what's coming here, they began to investigate the primordial. Through questioning, the primordial did not give a whole ton of answers. It wouldn't tell them anything about history, it wouldn't tell them much about what was going on in the galaxy, but the humans seemed to be convinced that this primordial was extremely important. In fact, their belief was the primordial was the last precursor. Aegis, what do you think of that mentality? You find two unknown things floating around in your galaxy, and you take them home to Ma and Pa, and you start interrogating the big ancient thing that you don't quite know what it is. Do you think that's normal? Do you think that's human interest? Do you think that's a good thing?
I think that's curiosity killing the cat in this case. Well, pretty much.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, it sounds like maybe we could possibly be trying to get an edge up on the Forerunners. Although in the time of peace, I kind of doubt that. But it could just be just general, it's like seeking knowledge and understanding of the past kind of thing. What do you think about
Yeah, I do question. I mean, I guess because they say in the storyline that they found this thing in some form of a precursor cage, that they assumed it had to be ancient, and they assumed likely it had to be a precursor itself. However, it still strikes me as a little odd that they basically take this thing back and begin to ask it about life, the universe, and everything. I don't know how they would just assume it would know about these things, especially because it becomes very clear initially they can't even properly speak to it,
And I mean,
right?
I believe at one point they actually started like not worshiping it, but building their civilization around when they brought it back. Is that true?
Yeah, from what I understand, Sharam Hakur, the planet that they were keeping it on, basically became their most advanced planet. And that's pretty much what you're saying. Yeah, they effectively built their most advanced civilization around this thing.
Mm.
And I don't know which in my mind would be more important, but the secondary thing almost seems to have been given a glancing thought and a not very important status in the powder. They found this powder floating around in space, and they let their scientists play with it, and what the scientists came up with, of all the things they researched, was that it slightly modified genetics. And then their scientists tinkered some more and realized it made their pets more docile, and it made their fur feel better at the touch.
Seems minor. Seems like a
It
convenient
seems
thing.
very much. But Aegis, what do you think of that process? As someone with a scientific background, you find an unknown vessel floating in space that contains cylinders of an unknown powder, and then you tinker with it and you find out it modifies genetics, and you start putting it in your pets.
I think you're asking for trouble. It sounds like it's too good to be true. You probably should be testing this shit a little more just to understand it fully. And if you find
Yeah,
these things kind of was the primordial and this powder in the canisters were they in the same ship?
no, the primordial was found basically on the equivalent of an asteroid out in the middle of nowhere.
I was gonna say because that would raise even further questions, but I mean they're both in space, so maybe they should think there might be some relationship there. But then
Yeah,
again, space
and
is pretty vast, so that's kind of maybe a moot point.
but do you think this is kind of like humans in the real world? I mean, there's plenty of history of humans developing these advancements and then finding out 20 years later that we poisoned ourselves. Um,
Uh,
so
there's been
do you think?
plenty of instances of that. You're right. Like, geez, there was a morning after pill in the 50s and 60s that if you took its chiral form, it gave you your children birth defects. I forget the name of it, but it was prevent morning sickness during pregnancy. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I have heard of it. I don't know many details, but I do remember it was something to do with not morning after. It was the when women wake up sick while pregnant. I know that just made me sound very dumb, but yes.
But yeah, it's like something that we don't know the long-term impacts of, but we know the short-term gains and we use it. It's kind of like, today. I wonder what the long-term effects of caffeine are. Taking it every day. I'm sure I'm gonna have a heart attack in 20 years, ideally longer, but it's
Yeah,
it can't be good.
right. So do you think this is that unrealistic of a portrayal of how humans would act when they found something like this?
Not at all. It sounds pretty on point. Probably
Right.
inspired by
So
events in real life.
inspired by every year of human existence. Um, but yeah, I when I first read this, I was like, how could you be this dumb? And then I thought about it and was like, no, wait, it registers. So, okay, so humanity basically begins to use this powder to at least not genetically modify themselves. They use it to genetically modify their pets, and then they give this powder to another species known as the Sanchium, which
I'm
are
I'm sure
what?
PETA would like to have a word. You've seen other pets.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what they do. And then they give it to the Forerunners. And at the time, or not the Forerunners, sorry, the Sanchium or the Prophets. The Prophets were allies to humanity at this time. They didn't have their God complex at this time.
Whoa, they're the
And
prophets?
yeah, the Sanchium were the Prophets.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I knew they were allies just from reading up on this, but like that's cool. Shit.
No, they are the Prophets. And unfortunately, just like humanity, eventually they will not remember this part of the storyline. So they don't remember that they were once friends with us.
Wow.
So the Sanchium and humans begin to lace their pets with a genetically modifying powder. And the story says that this happens over hundreds of years, but eventually spurts of tentacles or no, the first thing that happens is a weird soft spot appears on the animals just between their shoulder blades, and the fur becomes very, very, very soft. And what they witness is these animals begin to eat this fur off of the other pets. And it's almost like this is a mutation, and it's somehow spreading that mutation by using pheromones or by using scent to make other animals in the species that aren't infected by the mutation eat it. And then somehow this mutation modifies the animal that it's in. And I know at the time, and I know the books describe this as a mutation, but I think it makes more sense that at this point these animals are infected with something. And Aegis, yes, you've already spoiled, but I think this is more of an infection than a genetic modification, don't you?
Yeah, it sounds like some kind of growth or like a could be a tumor or something your body's just trying to or something your body's just trying to resist, right? Like get this out of me. It doesn't
Right.
belong in
And
your
then
foreign body.
right, but then it's somehow through scent or something, it's luring the uninfected versions of these animals into eating it.
Hmm. Yeah, that is weird, isn't it? Huh.
It is, but to me it also makes potential sense. I mean, again, you begin to modify an animal to release scents or to release pheromones or something, and that's how you begin to spread this infection before you become powerful enough to begin to spread it in other ways, would be a good way to say it.
Yeah, that sounds like it makes sense. Yeah.
And it reflects more, to me it reflects more real world infections, because this avoids what most parasitic species, and you've already spoiled this, so I don't know why I'm trying to avoid saying it. Most parasitic species and most diseases do not want to immediately cause problems in their hosts. In fact, they want to avoid causing problems for as long as possible because it allows infection to spread unnoticed.
Isn't that kind of like a tapeworm?
Right. So that's kind of what this reminds me of. A parasite spreading in a way that's odd, but wouldn't necessarily tip humanity off to something being severely wrong. Do you think that reflects real world situations, Aegis?
Uh, I mean, yeah, I just even just think of like a tapeworm, like it's just trying to like live in your body, like a symbiotic relationship, or something that's kind of trying to fly under the radar until it becomes a problem for the host.
Right. And eventually it's in enough of the population that it's already infected enough that nothing can be done. And
I'm glad
we're
Cobra doesn't
getting
like that.
no, no, no. We're not allowed to say the C word on YouTube. But no, there's nothing in the world right now that's similar to that. But we all know where this is going. Aegis has already said it, and I'm sure anyone listening can already tell what this is. Eventually, these growths on their shoulders become tentacles, and these creatures begin to attack humans. Now, from the lore, it doesn't appear that the humans who become infected during this outbreak initially look like what we know is coming. They become more crazy, almost as if they've been infected by some form of disease that rots away at their brain and makes them hyper aggressive, super hungry, and willing to attack and cannibalize other humans. And that's what happens here. They effectively attack other humans, and any humans that resist are forced to eat the flesh of either the animals or the actual infected humans, further spreading the infection. And this gets a little disturbing, even in comparison to what they become in the game. But effectively, these things are spreading infection through bites, through scratches, and through forcibly making other humans consume their flesh.
Kinky.
Yeah, how's that for disturbing, Aegis?
Yeah, it doesn't turn my crank.
No, I think it's pretty gross. But we all know what's coming here. Eventually, these forms become much more aggressive, become much more warped, and they show themselves as the first outbreak of the flood. Now, humanity is immediately taken aback by this. They begin losing entire planets to the outbreak, not just cities, not just continents. They lose entire planets rapidly. So they go to the primordial. Aegis, what do you think of that mentality? We don't know what we're doing. So rather than go to, I don't know, the Forerunners, we go to the creature that we don't quite understand. Do
You
you
know,
think there's any logic behind that?
it's funny. I think of like a little kid, like they did something bad, but they're trying to hide it from their parent. Now the Forerunners aren't their creators, so they're in like an alliance with them, but they don't want them to know that they screwed the pooch. So they're trying to figure this out in-house before it gets really worse, which it does.
Well, that's pretty funny. That's a good way to look at it. I wonder if that's kind of the way they meant for that to be taken. Again, guys, this might have been explained in lore somewhere, but I don't ever remember it being explained fully why the humans didn't go to the Forerunners. But Aegis, I think that's as good a theory as any. That's kind of funny. Um, but the fact of the matter is, what happens next is, as most of the stories in, well, basically the pre-present storyline of Halo, things get dark. The humans have figured out a way to speak to the primordial, and they ask it a question involving the flood. And it's never quite clarified what this question is, but most people assume it is a question around how do you stop the flood, or what are the flood. And whatever the answer that the primordial gives, and again, this is not known, it's never ever stated in storyline what happens, but the answer the primordial gives causes almost every human scientist at the facility to commit suicide.
You gotta wonder what the hell the Primordial told the humans. Really though.
Yeah, and my theory, you've pretty much already spoiled it, what my theory is around what the primordial said, but effectively this leaves the primordial alone. The humans that are researching it are effectively gone, and the flood are spreading. So humanity is forced to retreat from the flood with no answers that are of value, at least none that we know of. And two things happen. The first is that humanity thinks they begin to develop a cure. And I don't know if cure is the right word, but I don't even know if vaccine is the right word. But they effectively, yeah, this gets dark too. Uh, they effectively find a way to mutate human genetics so that when a flood infector form infects a human, the flood form gets effectively driven crazy. These flood forms will then attack other flood. So humanity goes ahead and intentionally infects 1/3 of their population. And think about this, this is billions of humans on hundreds of planets. They intentionally infect 1/3 of their entire population in order to basically create a wall where the flood will infect these humans and then turn on itself. Aegis, do you think the end justifies the means here?
Yeah, not really. Um, yeah, sorry, actually, I just zoned it. Something happened in real life. Like the cat's meow. I think she wants to get out of the room. Little bugger.
No
Sorry,
problem.
keep continue.
So I was just saying that basically humanity has infected 1/3 of their own population with this genetic modifier so that the flood will attack themselves. And then they intentionally put 1/3 of their population. And when you think about it, that's billions of people times hundreds of planets. 1/3 of them are put up in front of the flood as a sacrifice to allow the flood to intentionally infect them to try to spread this disease throughout the flood and cause the flood to exterminate itself.
Oh, but hold up. Does that mean the third of the population dies?
Yes,
Oh,
it means
that's
that
hmm.
that's what I
Okay,
was asking.
Jesus. I mean, that is the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many, and that's survival of like the species as a whole. So I mean, that's calling into question really a lot of like philosophical like things here. Things that I
What
probably
do
just
you
studied
think?
for on an exam. Jesus. Um,
Faced with extinction, would you sacrifice 1/3 of our population?
I mean, if it's either 1/3 or all, I mean, yes, but I don't think I like having that responsibility.
I
So,
don't think
or
anyone would.
that mantle of responsibility, if you will.
I don't think I would like it either. But I'm priming you here because the next phase, again, gets darker. While this appears to be working, humanity is still fighting a war on at least one front right now. The Flood are still pushing forward. They're carpet bombing their own worlds and they're being pushed back. They can't stay on the planets where the Flood already are. They're having to retreat, destroy the planet, and then relocate their own population in order to get them away from the Flood. This is where the Forerunners come back into the story. Humanity gets pushed back into Forerunner territory, and with them comes the Flood. So, two things happen. The Forerunners witness the fact that humanity has multiple ships that are basically laden with civilians, and then the Forerunners witness humanity start bombing Forerunner worlds. Forerunner worlds are becoming infected by the Flood, and as soon as it happens, humanity starts destroying the planets. So it gets a little vague here whether or not the Forerunners actually understand the Flood exist. But either way, the Forerunners look at what humanity is doing and sees it as aggressive expansion. Either they believe the Flood exists, but they believe they're not that big of a threat, or they believe humanity's lying about the existence of the Flood and they're aggressively attacking the Forerunners with an excuse.
Which does seem
Now,
kind of odd because, if the humanity has never actually like pressed into 400 territory in such a way before, wouldn't you think, well, this isn't normal, something's got to be going on, right?
but at the same time, Aegis, if you had an alien species come in and bomb billions of people into oblivion, would you really want to hear them out? Or would you really even give the opportunity to hear them out?
No, at that point, it's kind of like, well, your actions are speaking louder than your words, and there's no words, so let's go to war.
Right. And that was kind of why I asked you the philosophical question about does the end justify the means? Because that becomes one of the biggest questions in Halo lore. The things that happen over the next X amount of millennia in the storyline are basically all very, very awfully morally gray, right? I mean, would you want to be the person activating the weapons that would do all of this damage?
Nope, nope, too much
Right.
responsibility. It would weigh on me too much.
Right. Now, how awful would you feel if all of a sudden the threat just disappeared?
Oh my God, then you'd basically, their uh, species not only got bombed back to the Stone Age, but also like a third of the population, and then even more than that in the Forerunner War were just dead for no reason.
Right. So the Forerunner War starts. And there was a reason why I asked you the question of how you'd feel if the threat disappeared. Because humanity is forced to engage the Forerunners. The Forerunners turn on humans and create a two-way war. The Flood attack humanity on one side, with the Forerunners attacking and eliminating humanity on the other. When all seems pretty much hopeless for humanity, the Flood spontaneously, out of nowhere, retreat and disappear from the galaxy.
A war on
How
two
would you
fronts.
Right. But how would you feel as the Forerunners and as the humans that all of this is happening and the Flood retreat out of nowhere? They leave, they're gone. It's as if they weren't there. How would you feel as a human? But then more specifically, how would you feel as the Forerunners? Tell me what you think as a human, how you'd feel about that.
Oh my God, it's just like, well, I don't have anything to explain my actions, and there's literally no proof as to my reasoning, so I'm kind of screwed. But as like a Forerunner, I feel like you'd also, I would feel like you'd be confused as to why, and then to just to see your opponent just be utterly decimated, and then have no excuse for why or proof. Like, it sounds like they would probably grow to either not like or hate the humans or not respect them, and then that's kind of why they seem like they bombed them back to the Stone Age, right? They just almost devolved them, so to speak.
Right. And that is the next part of the story. The Forerunners decide, in their own frustration and anger at humanity, to punish them. They take away all remaining human worlds except for humanity's home world, which is Earth, and they take away all of our technology, and then they de-evolve us. Now, it's heavily hinted in the books that de-evolution literally means modifying our genetics to make us dumber. But either way, they trap us on Earth with no technology. Aegis, from the point of view of the Forerunners, do you believe that sounds justified? Or do you think that's a power grab?
I mean, it's definitely a power grab because then you're just securing yourself as the ultimate power in the universe, right? There's humanity was close, and I think by extension, what's the prophet's race called? Sanshium? Sanshium?
Sanchium. Yep.
Yeah. Like, were they also devolved too?
Uh, the Sanchium were effectively wiped out. I don't believe that they became a large part of this war. Or I believe they were part of the war. They were part of the alliance, but they were nowhere near as powerful as humans. And the impression I get was by the time the humanity engaged the Forerunners, there weren't many Sanchium left.
And I think they were
So,
too wrapped up with the flood too, right?
right. So I don't think that the Sanchium were punished like humanity was because I don't think the Forerunners really realized they were involved in the war.
Exactly. I think I think this is going to touch on events that happen later on, but they're also wrapped up with, I believe, the Forerunners, right?
Who's wrapped up with the Forerunners?
Sanshium.
Yeah, so basically the Forerunners were the head species in the galaxy, so all of the other species were forced to be involved with them just because the Forerunners were so powerful.
I guess what I mean is through the war, though. Like, um,
Oh,
maybe no, no. I'm thinking of events actually in Cryptum, the book.
right.
Sorry, I'm getting so many wires crossed here. This a lot of different battles and such. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. So at this point, the Forerunners have devolved humanity. Do you think it's justified? Do you think taking an entire advanced species, even like say humanity now, humanity at the technological advancement that we are now, do you think it would ever be justified to take our species and remove all technology and remove our intelligence and force us to go back to being apes?
That's such a weird concept, like being able to strip people of that power. It's something that I never even thought was possible. I mean, it's fiction, so yeah, of course it is. But like, I, hmm, that's again, you're really throwing the good ones at me, Winter. But I
Sorry.
mean, you're not pulling any punches. No. What I mean, who's to tell you what is and is not justified when you're an apex predator, right? You can do what you want when you want for the reason you want, and really nobody's going to question you because in this case, the apex predator is an entire species, and they probably don't all want what was done, but I'm sure enough of the majority said yes, let's devolve humans and humanity and make them as little of a threat as possible.
And that's effectively what they did. So coming to the end of this video, as it stands, the Santium have pretty near been eliminated by the flood. Humanity has been devolved into basically nothing, and the precursors are effectively driven out of the universe. The Forerunners stand as the only military might left that is powerful enough to rule the galaxy, and they are basically unopposed in intelligence, military, and architecture.
You know what's kind of crazy actually is they really like this whole Forerunner flood human war that kind of nullified any assistance that humanity could give to the Forerunners if, say, a fourth party from outside of the galaxy or the Precursors returned somehow. Like they would be on their own. And I'm sure like the Forerunners were fine in the first war with the Precursors or you know some benevolent force like that, but they would be on their own essentially, no allies.
Right. And I mean, let's be honest here, Aegis. You kind of, I'm giving you a hard time, but you have already kind of spoiled this. The flood come back, and I don't think this was an accident, right? The Forerunners have been left as the sole defenders of the galaxy, and at this point, they don't even fully understand what's going on. What kind of a power? Do you think that's a good power play?
It's definitely a power play, but I mean, you're basically like make yourself like in a very exposed position because now you have basically secured the power of the universe, but also every one of the other races that wasn't. I'm not sure if the other races were put to the same treatment, like devolved like humanity, but there's definitely the seat of power that's attained and secured by the Forerunners that is not for anybody else, and so maybe there's like all of us feeling like a lower class compared to the upper class, like the lower class not liking the upper class kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the way I see this is I think it's a subconscious paranoia in the Forerunners. I think they know what they did to the Precursors, and they were probably afraid humanity, the Santium, these other powerful species might someday do it to them.
Mm.
And I don't know if they fully grasped just how dangerous the Flood were, but I think they certainly grasped the opportunity to intentionally take out humanity and kind of just, again, the books don't really go into detail, I don't think, but kind of just let the Santium get destroyed by the flood. So
I mean, this could have
that
been the Precursors' plan all along to enact revenge on the Forerunners. Like this is like they're waiting in quiet and hiding for their ultimate time to strike.
right, and that's what I mean. You've basically turned the Forerunners against everyone. The Forerunners, in paranoia or through a power grab, have effectively left themselves the last man standing in the galaxy.
Hmm.
Now you've already spoiled it, but guys, we will get into the next video in a few days, and we will discuss the Flood Forerunner War and the revelation that their primordial is not only a precursor, it is the first grave mind. Now, Aegis, I thought we were going to save that for the second video, but since we've already done spoil it in this video, I guess we can call that a cliffhanger and say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, cliffhanger. We'll call it that. Sure. My bad.
All right, guys, we're gonna get off for tonight. We're trying to make these videos a bit shorter. Aegis, do you have anything more that you wanted to say?
No, I think like you and like our viewers, I think they're gonna learn a lot more in the second video too. I mean, I'm finding I'm learning as these videos go on, but or as this videos went on, but it's cool. It's been fun.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Aegis, I know that you know quite a bit more going into the Forerunner Flood War, and you know quite a bit more about the more modern timeline. So I look forward to speaking less.
Oh dear. No pressure.
All right, guys. You have a good evening.
Awesome. Later, guys.